Today we're talking about chord changes. My name is Ayla, your name is probably not Ayla, and today we're going to be looking at some tips and tricks that you can use to get better at changing chords on the guitar. That was a bunch of chord changes in a row, and you might be wondering, how can I do that? Well, today we're going to explore how you can get better and faster at changing chords. So improving your speed when it comes to changing chords is something that a lot of people struggle with. It's very normal to struggle with this. And it's also something that will naturally develop over time as long as you're not building any crazy habits while you're playing. Just the more you practice, the faster you'll get. However, I want to show you some exercises and tips and tricks that you can use to expedite that process. So learning how to play chords on the guitar in general is already difficult enough. It can be painful. You're learning how to put your hand in all sorts of weird shapes and press down on strings, and the whole thing can be really awkward, especially when you're starting, let alone changing from one chord to the next. This is a very, very usual experience. Don't feel like you're doing anything wrong if you're finding this difficult. I definitely found this very difficult at the start of my playing. It took me a long time to get comfortable with changing chords. But the first thing you can do is just choose a chord that you do know well. Could even be something like E minor, which is a chord that only requires 2 fingers. And whenever you're learning a chord, the best thing you can do is check to make sure you're playing it properly. And the way I always recommend doing that is to just go through string by string and make sure everything is sounding nice, it's ringing out. This is a great way to make sure that you're putting enough pressure on all of the frets. There we go, that sounds better. Can help you avoid covering strings by accident when you don't mean to. You'll be able to correct your habit if you know what you're doing wrong. And that's always the first step, because if you don't know how to play a chord well, changing from that chord to the next chord is going to be so much more difficult. So before you even practice changing from one chord to the next, just spend a lot of time with each chord that you learn as you start building your chord vocabulary. So to really develop muscle memory with the chord shape that you learn, it's really important to be mindful of what your fingers are doing. You could even separate this process finger by finger. And again, going back to that E minor chord, I can really pay attention, firstly, to what my thumb is doing. Where is my thumb on the neck? Where does it need to be to play this chord comfortably? Then I'm going to think about my middle finger, same thing. Same thing with my third finger here, ring finger. And this, of course, is the same for any chord you learn. You just pay attention to each finger as you go through with that string-by-string process that I showed you previously. Once you start getting really comfortable with those chord shapes, here's a really good exercise for you. Take your finger off, take your fingers, your whole hand, off the string, and then see if you can just grab that chord, and then release. And this is something you can do while you're watching television, hanging out with your friends, whatever you're doing. You can just spend time every day, even for a few minutes, going through all of the chords that you know with this exercise. Play the chord, then release. Play the chord, then release. Maybe play another chord, and then release. You can just focus on one chord at a time as well. It's just about being in tune with your own learning style and where you're at in your playing, and you do what you need to do to feel comfortable with every chord that you learn. And while you're doing this, just to make sure that you're building all the right habits, keep checking in here and there. See if the chord is sounding exactly the way it should be. Let's say I practice my C chord a bunch and I'm like, oh, look at this. I'm playing my C chord and I'm landing right on my C chord. And then I go to check and it sounds like that. Well, I can look and see that that's not a C chord, right? Because I could maybe cross-reference with any diagrams I'm using to learn, maybe use my ear, whatever it is, and just take a step back, go back to square one. But don't be discouraged if that happens, because literally anytime you pick up the guitar and you try playing, you will learn something, because you're either going to be doing something right and you'll be building a good habit, or you'll be doing something not quite as right and you'll learn what you can do better in the future. and that's great. So to move into this chord changing process without fully jumping into a whole song or a whole chord progression, you can just isolate 2 chords at a time. You can choose 2 chords randomly. You could start with ones that you know are pretty easy for you, let's say E minor to A minor, and just really focus on those 2 chords together. But I think in the best case scenario, you challenge yourself to do this process with the 2 most difficult chords you know. And then if you can tackle the 2 chords that you find really challenging, everything will be easier from that point forward. So in case you're wondering what some challenging chords could be that you could consider integrating into this exercise, some really common ones that people struggle with are G major, like I played previously, going to D minor. Just really take your time. You could even start by going through that 1 string at a time process. And then over time, hopefully you'll get much faster at the whole thing. But it's a process. Another one that's really challenging for a lot of people would be going from F major to B major. I played it wrong. See? Everyone needs to work on it. Like that. Though I usually play my major chords like this. And then over time, it starts to get easier, right? But we all start somewhere. Those ones in particular, like I said, are great to set as goals for yourself, because once you are able to successfully play those chords in succession, you will have made so much progress, it's not even going to be funny. It's going to be amazing. Why did I say that? I don't know. I don't know where to end my sentence. I'll end it right here. So the next trick that I would like to put forth to you is kind of more of a mindset thing than anything, but you always want to try to think ahead of the chord change that you're on. So for example, let's say I'm playing a song where I'm going from a C major to a D major. As soon as I put my fingers down to play C, I'm already thinking about the D major chord that I'm going to. And now I'm already thinking about the C major chord. And I'm already thinking about where the root note of that chord is, or the first note of that chord, where I'm going to be playing it, where I need to be moving the rest of my fingers. I could even be thinking about, well, my middle finger is going to need to move down to the E string, all sorts of little things like that. It's just about thinking ahead of where you are in the music, because it'll help you, not have to scramble at the last second to say, what's the next chord change? Oh, shoot, it's D major. I don't know what to do. And then you've already missed the chord change. It's really sad. But this is a good habit to get into, and it'll help you a lot in the long run. And another thing I wanted to present to you as an idea, because this is something I use a lot, especially when I'm going through challenging chord changes. If you're aware of where the starting note of the chord is, which is often the root note, but not always, you can buy yourself a little extra time by, starting the chord from the root note. So here I'm trying to move to D major. I'm going to play the D string, and then I'm going to play the whole chord. So I've bought myself like an extra 8th note to get to that next chord. And like I said, it'll give you time to get the rest of your fingers in order. And sometimes you just need that little extra time, because it can be hard to land right on the next chord change. Now this isn't always the case, but sometimes when you're moving from one chord to the next, there are going to be common tones between them where you don't actually have to move all of your fingers. And you can think of these as being anchor points. Like for instance, if I'm going between a C major and an F major, you might notice here that my first finger simply has to flatten like this, but it's really not moving anywhere. And then my third finger and second finger are simply hopping down a set of strings. And once you're aware of that, and you build that mind-body connection, it can just make things a little bit easier when you're trying to hop between chords. So once you're comfortable with all of this and you're looking for the next step, the next challenge, you can try to practice without looking at your fretting hand. You can make a very concerted effort to look the other way, or you can force yourself to look away by using a blindfold or turn all the lights off, practice in the dark, something like that, whatever you need to do to make sure you're not looking at your fretting hand, whether that's your right hand or your left hand or your third hand. I don't know how many hands you have. But that's such a great way to continue to build this muscle memory. And especially once you are confident that you're playing the right chord. Again, going back to a point I made previously, if you're still not quite comfortable playing through all the chords, I would still make sure that you're playing each chord properly before you go through this process, just to make sure that you're not building any habits that you have to break later, just because, that'll be a little extra time that you could avoid just by checking first that you're playing everything right. But again, like I said, once you're comfortable and confident doing that, just try going through all the chords you know in the dark. All right, so now we're going to put everything that we've spoken about in this lesson into practice with a real song, because I think any song that you're working on can become a practice exercise if you really focus on what you could learn from the experience of learning that song. And I'm going to be using the song Lola by the Kinks as an example because A, it's an awesome song. B, two, it also is a great song to practice changing between your chords. So we're going to try it at a few different tempos. Feel free to follow along to check your progress. And let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's try it at a faster tempo. I'll count you in. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you found that difficult, don't worry, that's actually faster than the original song. We're just turning this into a fun little practice exercise to get from one chord to the next. But we're going to try a third tempo now, just in case you're feeling all right with all the chord changes we've looked at so far. And we'll keep practicing, so let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the last trick I want to throw your way is something that will hopefully help a lot when you encounter bar chords, because we've been looking a lot more at open chords today, but obviously bar chords are something that a lot of people struggle with, and that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But something that I found really useful is this. The bridge part of Lola has a chord progression that begins with A major, E major, B major. And you can see that I'm playing all bar chords here. And if you can already do that, that's great, you've put in a lot of work, but a lot of people would find that very intimidating. And so, a technique you can use where you start by just playing all of these chords with power chords, which are these 3-finger shapes that you can move all over the neck. But what you can do is slowly replace these power chords one at a time with bar chords. So I could start with replacing this first chord, A major, with a full A major bar chord. And then the next 2 chords will simply be power chords. And then I can do each chord one at a time in this way. So I could start with a power chord, and then I could play a full E major bar chord here, and then back to a power chord. And of course, you can probably assume that this would apply to the last chord as well. We could have power chord, bar chord. And then, after you've gotten comfortable isolating each of these, you can start trying to string them together and replace whichever bar chord you find most difficult with a power chord to begin with, just so you can play through any song you're learning. And then eventually you can work your way towards playing it all with bar chords. But this is a great way to, keep working on your bar chords in isolation, but not feel like you're held up by the fact that you can't play them yet. because you can still play through songs with, just power chords, and then slowly start implementing bar chords into your playing. So I hope that you found these tips helpful and they give you something to work towards in your playing and work with in your playing. And I'm gonna play you out with Lola, and feel free to leave a comment down below what chords you hate transitioning to the most. I am actually very curious to know. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching. Peace.